Hello and welcome back to the Moody Distance Learning Center. I'm Christian Martinson and I am here with Dr. James Spencer, who is on the phone with us from his home. How are you, Dr. Spencer?
I'm doing well, thanks.
Good. So we're jumping right in here to themes of the Pentateuch. And as we do, James, could you just describe to us a little bit about what exactly is a theme?
Yeah, I think themes are described as or identified as in a number of different ways in biblical scholarship. But I'm going to go back outside of biblical scholarship to a couple of guys named Thrall and Hibbard, and they wrote a book in the 1960s called A Handbook to Literature. And in their book, they describe a theme as the central or dominating idea in a literary work. And they go on to further say it's the abstract concept which is made concrete through its representation in person, action, and image in the work.
Okay.
Now, really what that means is it's the main idea of what you're reading. It's the idea around which a lot of other pieces sort of gravitate.
Sure.
And so as we look at people, as we look at the dynamics between people, and as we look at the stories in the Pentateuch, those stories are ultimately going to reveal to us what the Pentateuch is trying to get across, which is its major theme or message.
Absolutely. Now, we've already gone through a little bit of a lecture on how to read the Pentateuch. How is that going to play in here?
Yeah, I think we need to remember, just as we said in that lecture, that the Pentateuch should, in my mind, should really be read from Deuteronomy backwards. The Pentateuch was written by a group of people who are on the cusp of going into Canaan to conquer that land, to live within it. And, it's written before the conquest. So I think we have to keep that in mind, that this is a message for those people primarily. It was written by those people. It was written for those people to help them remember what they needed to remember in going in to go and subdue the land in Canaan.
Sure. And in terms of how God plans the development of these themes throughout the Pentateuch, how would you address that?
Yeah, I cite obviously a non-theological work to define the theme, but I think that we need to remember that when we're reading Scripture, what we're really looking for are theological themes.
Sure.
And that a lot of times when we identify a theme like law or like temple or covenant, it's easy for us to take our eyes off God and just try to understand the law, the temple, or the covenant.
Right.
And I think what we need to keep in mind, and what I'll try to do here today, is God is always that sort of central point around which the whole story revolves. And we need to keep that in mind. I think a truly theological theme is one that keeps God at the center.
Absolutely. Now, what would be an example of how potentially someone could not be keeping God at the center while still being somewhat biblical?
Yeah, I think this happens a good bit, particularly in biblical scholarship, upper level kind of biblical scholarship. We have a tendency to get into the minutia of things and to look at a particular law or examine the comparison between an ancient Near Eastern covenant and a biblical covenant.
Sure.
And those things are great. They shed so much light on the biblical text. We understand the biblical text so much more when we do that. But I think often we forget to take that next step, because it's not just about, biblical interpretation is not just about understanding the text. It's really about moving beyond that and understanding God.
Yes.
And understanding who He is. And so I think any time that we just stop with the text, that's when we get into trouble.
Absolutely. Now, if there would be a central verse that could identify with a main theme throughout the Pentateuch, is there something or a passage that you would be willing to camp on that gives us an idea of what a main theme throughout the Pentateuch would be?
Yeah, I think my only disclaimer is that there's multiple themes in the Pentateuch, and that I'm going to go through one, but it's one that I really feel is overarching, and one that I feel is very pervasive throughout the text of the Pentateuch, and of a great deal of importance as we read the book, kind of keep in mind. And the verse I'd identify is actually Genesis 1:28. God blessed them and said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it, rule over the fish in the sea, the birds in the sky, and over every living creature that moves on the ground."
Yeah. And why would that be a central theme?
Yeah, it's God's mandate to mankind. Some people call it a command. This is what God is telling man to do. Other people, and I would tend to agree more with this, God is really setting forth man's destiny.
Yeah.
This is where he sees man going. This is the trajectory that he wants them to go on, and he's going to empower them to move in that direction.
Absolutely. Now, do you see that this theme is something that appears multiple times throughout the Pentateuch, or something that the rest of the Pentateuch goes back to this, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think even the repetition of be fruitful and multiply, if you did a word search on that, you'd find it across the entire Pentateuch, particularly in Genesis. We mentioned this last time, but one of the things that happens in Genesis is this struggle for progeny. Abraham has trouble having children, and we see him struggle with that, trying to figure out who his heir is going to be. That's related, really, to this be fruitful, multiply. Well, he can't multiply if he can't have kids.
Yeah.
Jacob and Esau battle over the blessing. And they're trying to figure out who's going to be really holding that firstborn status.
Mm-hmm.
You have similar things with the famine that's described at the end of Genesis, and the role that Joseph plays in that. How are the Israelites to be saved and prosper if they're all starving to death?
Yeah.
And so even in Genesis, you see this theme come up over and over and over again.
Sure.
You actually see the words verbatim a number of times.
Sure.
And then when you begin Exodus, what you really see is this battle between Pharaoh and God. The Pharaoh who knows not Joseph cares really nothing for this divine mandate.
Yeah.
And so what he continually tries to do is oppose what God is trying to do through the Israelites.
Yeah.
And if you read that text, you see Pharaoh really trying to curtail the growth of Israel and eventually trying to wipe them out.
Yeah.
And so all of Exodus really is framed by this divine destiny that Israel is given to multiply, to be fruitful, to multiply, and to fill the earth.
Yeah. Excellent. And so, are there other things then throughout the Pentateuch, or does that give us basically that broad framework of what we're dealing with here?
I think there are a number of other things with regard to the be fruitful and multiply. There are definitely other pieces there. I think if we look at the rest of that verse, fill the earth and subdue it. The subdual of the earth is actually a major theme throughout the Pentateuch as well. Israel is on a quest to subdue the promised land.
Yeah.
They're trying to regain that land to make it habitable for God and for man. Obviously, God can live anywhere, but he likes to live in places where people obey him.
Sure.
And they obey his laws. And there's not sin running around all over the place. He prefers to be in those kind of places.
Sure.
And so Israel needs to go into the land, subdue the people who are there already, who are not following God, who have no intention of obeying his commands.
Sure.
And Israel needs to follow that covenant. So we have the law mixed in here, and obedience to the law and how important that is. We see the wilderness wanderings, which is really a testing period for Israel, where they're going to be disciplined, and their obedience and their behavior is going to be sharpened so that they will obey God.
Yep.
And then finally, we see them standing on the cusp of the promised land, ready to go in, and you have this entire covenant reiterated to them, calling them to obey God so that they can go in, subdue the earth, and enjoy God's blessing.
Fantastic. Now, final words, overall theme of the Pentateuch, what do you want people to take away from this?
I think what I would say, just to bring it back down to a very theological statement, is that God is a God who determines. And by that, I mean to try to grab creation. God determines where things go as part of his creative activity. God determines the destiny of mankind. Human problems, such as infertility, human strife, the wrestling for the blessing between Jacob and Esau, human rulers like Pharaoh are not going to stand in the way of him moving his people toward his intended end.
Yeah.
And so at the end of the day, I think the Pentateuch is really about God as determiner. He is the one who determines where his people will go. They just simply need to participate with him, obey him, and trust that he will take them from point A to point Z.
Perfect. Well, Dr. Spencer, thanks for your time. We're going to look next on the theme of the historical books. Thanks for joining us.